On a bitter winter night in Coldwater, Montana, a weathered sheriff named Ethan Cole was easing home after a long shift when a thin cry threaded the wind and stopped him beside a line of dumpsters. And there, in the weak streetlight, he saw an 8-year-old girl shivering with a torn mitten pressed to an injured German shepherd's leg. And with one small gesture, he slipped off his coat and knelt, unknowingly tugging the first loose thread of a secret the town had tried to stitch shut for a year. A retired K-9 called Ranger bearing an old task force tattoo, a child named Lily Harper who would not let go, and the scent of a man who smiled like a cut, Victor Kane. And before midnight that simple kindness would wake a sleeping storm, summon a federal agent with gray eyes and a careful voice, unmask a deputy who liked cash more than his oath, and drag the mayor out from behind tidy speeches. As snow wrote its hard scripture across the prairie and truth flickered in a cold warehouse in a dark house at the edge of town where a mother waited with hope tied at the wrists. And Ethan did not yet know that by wrapping a bandage around a dog's leg, he was binding 3 lives together and stepping into the worst of his own winter, a choice that would test the badge, the body, and the heart as Coldwater held its breath to see whether one warm room could outlast the storm. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button below the video. Thank you. Amen. Coldwater, Montana wore winter like a stern old coat, heavy, creaking, and honest. The wind came down off the Bitterroots in long, breathy sighs that blew crystalline veils of powder across Main Street. Past 9 and already the shopfront's hardware, diner, taxidermy were dark, their neon open signs sleeping behind frosted glass. The town's narrow service alley ran like a seam behind those buildings, yellow street lamps sluicing weak light into a corridor of galvanized dumpsters, stacked milk crates, and coiled steam from a restaurant vent that smelled faintly of onions and old coffee. Sheriff Ethan Cole toggled his cruiser's engine off and sat for a moment, listening to the heater's last whisper fade. It had been one of those shifts, the kind with more paperwork than answers and a rumor that wouldn't stop circling. The mayor planning to dissolve their department under a budget reform, which in Coldwater was a polite way of saying the town expected the badge to do more with less until there was nothing left but the badge. The thought put a stale taste in Ethan's mouth. He stepped out, the door's thunk muffled by snow, and the night met him with a knife-edged cold that got into his ribs like it knew his name. Ethan Cole was 48 and built like the ranch fences he'd mended as a teenager. Tall, squared, scarred enough to be taken seriously. The years had written their own report across his face, a crease between the brows that looked permanent, a pale slash along his jaw where barbed wire had once made an opinion, and a dusting of silver at the temples that had arrived faster than he ever thought hair could travel. His hands were big, the knuckles nicked, but his voice never forgot to land softly. People trusted that, or they used to. He wore his winter duty coat, navy wool, over a Kevlar liner. Like a second skin, the sheriff's star on the breast scuffed from years of doors politely knocked and doors forced. The job had rounded his edges into something steadier after one winter, long ago, when a blizzard called White Sunday came screaming down from the high bowls, and he'd failed to reach a stranded pickup before the drift did. 2 bodies. A father who had put the kid's blanket over the child and left himself to the cold. That memory had turned Ethan into the kind of man who built his days on simple rules. Keep your promises, don't overtalk the truth, get there in time. He slung his flashlight into his palm, more for habit than need, and started toward the alley's mouth when he heard it, an odd, strained duet braided into the wind. First the child sob, small, hitching, breath snagged on fear. Then the low animal sound, not a bark, not quite, but a tight, involuntary whine that rose and snapped off like something trying to stay brave. The beam of his light cut a clean ribbon through the drifting snow. He paused, listening again. The town had its usual cast of backlot noises, an ice-laden downspout ticking like a clock, a freight train 2 miles off rolling its iron lullaby. But this was different. Ethan's gut tilted. He adjusted his cap lower, breath fogging the cold, and moved into the alley with the careful cadence that had gotten him through more than a few messes. Slow steps, shoulders turned, light down at a 45 so it didn't blind whoever he was walking toward or give them reason to bolt. The alley gave up its inventory in slices as he advanced. The diner's grease bin crouched like a dark animal, the thrift store's mannequin torso tipped on its side under a tarp like a wounded knight. the backs of the shops stitched with service doors and padlocks. The snow underfoot had a squeak to it, the particular sound of sub-zero powder that always reminded Ethan of pulling wool socks over wet feet in the ranch bunkhouse. He found himself keeping his boot falls deliberate, not wanting to startle whatever fragile thing the night was trying to hide. His flashlight licked across a dumpster and landed on a spill of cardboard, a cracked plastic sled, and then, against the wall where the alley narrowed on, a small figure hunched into itself, encircling a larger, darker shape with both arms. He let the beam slide off and onto the brick so he wouldn't flash her eyes. "Evening," he said, and the word came out warmer than the air. "Name's Ethan." The girl flinched, the movement so slight it felt like a tremor in the building rather than a gesture in a body. She couldn't have been more than 8. Strands of hair the color of dry wheat stuck to her cheeks in wet ribbons, and her knit cap had given up a fight with the wind a while back. You could tell by the way it hung off one ear like a flag after a storm. Her coat was a child's puffer done with totem animals in faded blues, the kind of jacket that had known better days, and it didn't fit. Someone had rolled the sleeves, then rolled them again. Her face had winter's blunt honesty stamped on it. Chapped mouth, nose gone red and raw, eyes too big, the blue burned bright by cold and fear. She clutched something tighter than she clutched herself. A dog. He was a German shepherd, the classic saddleback tan and black, though the black along his spine had grayed with age the way wolves do when the mountains decide they've stuck around long enough. His right ear stood tall. His left had a quarter-moon notch in it that said he'd learned a hard lesson and kept going. The dog's chest rose quick, each breath tossing a thin puff into the air that shredded immediately. His left foreleg was wrong weight kept off, the paw barely kissing snow, and a dark patch near the joint told a bad story under all that fur. Around his neck sat a collar whose leather had been oiled and re-oiled, stamped with the ghost of letters likely once bright. K9 Ranger. The name had the ring of both a job and a promise. "His name's Ranger," the girl got out, voice low and threaded with a bravery that seemed borrowed but well used. "He's a good boy. He helped me." Her words came in small, careful packages, as if she were rationing them to last the night. "Looks like he's a good boy," Ethan said, feeling the old circuits in his mind waking. Assess, triage, reassure. He crouched slowly, the way you approach a colt that still remembers the bite of a rope. "I won't touch him without telling you first. I won't touch you without asking. I'm Ethan Cole. I work here, Sheriff. Work." He tilted his shoulder so the star caught a lamplight glint, not dramatic, just enough to make the promise visible. "Lily," she said after a beat, like the name had been someplace cold and needed coaxing back. "Lily Harper." She held on to the dog with a determined tenderness that said she'd already decided whose side she was on in all things. The way she sat spoke of long hours spent making herself small in big spaces. One knee up, toes splayed in boots too big, the kind you get from a church basement bin where the best you can do is find something warm and pray it's close to your size. Under the fear were other layers: watchfulness, gentleness, a dignity that refused to leave even when everything else had. That combination, Ethan knew, didn't show up in a child unless life had been writing hard and early. "Hi, Lily." He let her hear the name in his mouth and laid it gently between them. "That leg on Ranger looks like it needs a look. May I check right there on the snow just to see if it's bleeding through?" He tapped 2 fingers against his own knee, then pointed toward Ranger's paw so she could track the request from his body language and not just his words. The dog's eyes found Ethan's, dark, steady, assessing. Ethan could feel the dog reading posture, breath rate, the small tells dogs learn from years of work beside people whose hearts beat faster when the world goes wrong. Ranger didn't growl. He didn't wag either. He tolerated the idea of a stranger. In Ethan's line of work, that counted as a gold star recommendation. From somewhere down Maine, a gust shouldered through and made the alley's trash lids clack, and Lily flinched so tightly that Ranger let out a short, consoling woof, as if to remind her which universe mattered was the small one they'd made between them. Ethan noticed the girl's right mitten had a thumb stitched back on with bright red thread careful stitches. Child small, proud. Whoever had taught her to mend had taught her to try first, cry later. He lowered himself another inch. "I've got a first aid kit in the cruiser," he said. "Couple of clean wraps, some vet tape, Maybe something to make this easier. He didn't say painkiller because he'd learned long ago that certain words grew teeth in children's ears. We'll keep him on the ground. No sudden moves. You're his person tonight. I'll follow your lead. The wind flipped the end of his scarf and brought with it the alley's night news. Leftover fryer oil, snow smelling like iron, that hollow echo a town gets when everyone's gone to ground and the dark has the streets to itself. He could feel the mayor's rumor trying to stick in his head again. Mayor Paul Redford with his tidy speeches about modernization and audits that read like obituaries for useful things. But the sound of Lily's breathing crowded it out. The job wasn't a ledger, not to Ethan. The job was the space between a small shaking body and the cold. The job was the tight animal breath of a dog who had given all the right pieces of himself to earn the job title now embossed on a collar, and still would have given more if the world asked. The job was now. Okay, Lily said. But it was a thin okay, the kind that a person might drop without knowing if their hands could catch it. Don't take him away. I won't take him anywhere you don't go, Ethan answered, letting the promise be as exact as a contract. He slid one glove off and held his hand out, not to the girl but toward the air above Ranger's shoulder, palm down, letting the dog get a catalog of him. Soap, cold wool, engine oil, old paper, the peppery edge of winter breath. Ranger sniffed once, then again, then blinked like he was filing a report for someone who'd asked him to be thorough. Ethan moved his flashlight to his boot toe, tipped it up just enough to wash a cone of indirect light over the leg. A thin slice through the fur near the joint. Not arterial, it wasn't pumping, but it wasn't nothing. Winter could hide the way blood gathered. Around the wound, the fur was clumped with a texture that said the cut was made by something sharper than broken ice. Ethan's jaw went hard for half a second and then softened again. He cataloged and stored it as if taking a photo in his mind. Not an accident, not likely. Ranger, Ethan murmured, the name a courtesy. You mind if I get a look? He let 2 fingers hover an inch above the fur. Ranger's gaze flickered to Lily, then back to Ethan. Permission would be a triangle they'd have to draw together. My mom used to say, Lily whispered, that if you want someone to trust you, you gotta be the warmest thing in the room. It sounded like something learned in a kitchen where winters are long and the stove stands for every good thing people do for each other. The words made Ethan's chest pull tight for an instant, as if a wire had been cinched around a memory. I like your mom's thinking, he said. He unbuttoned his coat, ignoring the bite of cold across his ribs, and shrugged it off, setting it like a little wall behind Lily's back so the wind would be persuaded to go around rather than through her. We'll be the warm things then, 2 of us, 3 if Ranger counts, and I reckon he does. She nodded, a movement so careful it seemed to have been negotiated privately. He always counts. Fair, Ethan said. He tilted his head toward the cruiser at the alley mouth. My kid is right there. I can walk backward so you can see me the whole time, or I can call it to me, leave the door open, lights on so you see where I am. Your call. You're the boss of this moment. The strange, aching power of being asked for a choice passed across Lily's face, and in that second she looked both 8 and ancient. Walk backward, she said, and a note of command edged in. Don't go out of the light. You got it, Ethan said. He stood slowly, knees reading their complaints into the cold, and lifted the flashlight into the beam's low cone again. I'll be right back, Lily Harper. I'm not leaving. The words were simple bricks, and he laid them in a line between her and the dark. He began backing toward the cruiser, boots squeaking, his shadow smudging along the brick like a patient dog. The alley seemed to hold its breath as he moved, the snowflakes choosing to float instead of fall for a beat, as if some old thing in Coldwater a Blackfoot story, a rancher's prayer, a church song had decided to pause and watch. Ethan kept Lily in the circle of his light, and Lily kept Ranger in the circle of her arms, and Ranger kept his big head resting on her small knee like the oldest oath in the world. Behind their figures, the town's quiet spread out in a long white sheet. In it, Ethan could imagine the rumor, the mayor, the budget, all of it shrinking against the one fact that mattered. A girl and a dog in an alley in a winter town, and a man with a badge whose job was to step in between. He reached for the cruiser's handle without turning away, fingers finding steel, and he knew before his hand closed that this night had already chosen him. In the breathless hush of Coldwater's winter, a story began. The cruiser's heater coughed to life as Ethan eased Lily and Ranger in, the dome light casting a weary amber across vinyl and steel. Snow brushed the windshield with the delicate insistence of moth wings, and Coldwater's alley shrank in the rear view to a thin seam of yellow lamps and tin lids. Lily Harper, 8 years old, boots too big, that wheat-colored hair gone damp and stringy under a sagging knit cap, never took her arms off Ranger. She sat upright as if her small spine had made a promise. In the glow from the dash, her face looked chiseled by winter into plane and shadow. Chapped lip, raw nose, eyes a hard bright blue that said she'd learned the arithmetic of fear, how to add small comforts, how to subtract noise, how to divide herself between being a child and being a guardian. Ranger, a German shepherd with the charcoal and tan saddle and a left ear nicked into a crescent, lay with his great head across Lily's lap. Up close, the dog smelled of iron and pine bark and the old dust of police kennels. His chest rose quick, his left foreleg hovering off the mat, and Ethan could see beneath the matted fur a clean cut that had no patience for accident, thin, decisive, the work of something man-made. He drove with the practiced quiet of someone who knows a sudden engine rev can break what little courage a child has managed to knit together. His house sat at the edge of town where the cottonwoods gave way to pasture and a two-track cut a faint wishbone into the snow. A cedar-sided single-story, gabled and stubborn, it crouched into the wind the way a good horse does when the sky goes white. Inside, it smelled of dry wood, coffee, and a ghost of saddle soap that had gotten into the grain of things and decided to stay. Ethan set a log on the wood stove, cracked the air, and watched the first lick of flame take like a shy thought turning bold. He shrugged out of his duty coat and set it over the back of the couch. "We'll stay here for a bit," he said, voice as level as a carpenter's bubble. "Warm up. Hot cocoa is the law in this county for anybody carrying a dog." He let that small joke breathe so Lily could decide what to do with it. The girl's mouth twitched around the idea of a smile and then thought better of it. "He'll have the cocoa," she said with fierce seriousness that made Ranger lift his eyes as if to say he'd take it under advisement. Ethan knelt, laying the first aid kit open like a tiny, orderly city. "Before cocoa," he said, "we give the hero his uniform, back meaning a leg that works." He spoke to Lily the way you speak to someone who's already done the hard part. "You can sit on the rug and keep him still. I'll talk through every move." He reached for the scissors, slid them under the clotted fur with a barber's caution, and trimmed a window. The cut was a neat slash near the joint, edges clean, the skin already puffing a little where cold had given way to heat. He rinsed with saline, the water catching the light in a brief jewel, then patted antibiotic and a pressure wrap with vet tape, blue climbing tight and even around the leg. Ranger's eyes stayed on him, not trusting exactly, but measuring trust like a working dog does, by the pace of breath and the steadiness of hands. "He knows the job," Ethan murmured, and the dog blinked slow, which in Ethan's book counted as a handshake. "What happened?" he asked Lily, voice tucked into the warmth rising from the stove. Lily's gaze drifted to the fire, where the first log had surrendered to orange. "We were behind the bakery," she said, each word like a small step on black ice. There were men. One of them had a box cutter. I pulled him, but he wouldn't leave me." She looked down at her mittens, the right thumb stitched with bright red thread in careful, child-small bites. "Mom will come back. She told me to wait, but bad people are looking." She swallowed the larger thing she wasn't yet ready to say. "We move a lot." The way she delivered those last 3 words made something knot inside Ethan, the old white Sunday memory rising and passing like a wave. He wrapped the end of the tape, pressed it with 2 fingers, and let his palm rest on Ranger's shoulder just long enough for the dog to feel the intention. Up close, he could map the older stories written in pale, fur-laced lines along the ribs and across the flank old harness rub, the ghost of a surgical seam, a healed bite just off the withers. The collar, oiled to velvet, read K9 Ranger in letters that had lost their shine, but not their authority. "You worked," Ethan said softly to the dog. "A long time by the look of it. Not with my outfit, different training, different tells." He touched the dog's jaw, and the shepherd opened his mouth without protest, a quick flash of worn molars. "He's 7, maybe 8, Ethan said to Lily. "Still got a lot of miles." He stood, knees popping, and went to the cupboard to make cocoa. Powder, milk, sugar, the kindness of cinnamon. It wasn't gourmet, but it was sweet, and tonight sweetness counted as medicine. As the cocoa swirled, he glanced at the wall phone where a small magnet held the number for Child Protective Services, and the air in his chest went thin the way it does in high country. Duty was a straight road in the daytime. At night, with a kid clutching a dog like a lighthouse, it forked. Call tonight, and Lily might be moved into a system that sometimes did well and sometimes did harm, and Ranger would be placed somewhere that wasn't Lily's arms. Wait, and he'd be fudging his own rulebook and trusting his nose over policy. He poured, handed the first mug to Lily, the second he set by Ranger's nose as a joke offering, and the dog sniffed it gravely, as if filing a report that cinnamon was an acceptable policy exception. "We'll get your friend a proper look," Ethan said, making the first compromise of the night. "There's a vet I trust." He picked up the receiver and dialed the number he knew by muscle memory. Dr. Marla Jennings answered on the second ring with a voice that carried the pragmatic calm of one who had midwifed calves in sleet and stitched barn cats by flashlight. Marla was early 40s, tall in the way that makes you think of willow trees, with long dark hair caught in a simple low braid and streaked with two earnest threads of silver. Her face was handsome rather than pretty broad forehead, thoughtful brown eyes that weighed worry and didn't waste words. A faded denim jacket usually hung from her shoulders like a well-broken-in idea. And her hands were those quiet, astonishing hands a good vet has, square-palmed, strong-fingered, warm. She'd grown up on a ranch where kindness had to keep pace with weather or it didn't matter, and where losing animals taught you every season that love and competence were not opposites. "I owe you coffee," she said by way of hello. "You owe me a look at a canine with a leg that's writing sentences I don't like," Ethan said. "Sharp cut, stable but dirty, kid attached. That part is non-negotiable." He could feel Lily listening to the shape of his words. Kid attached, non-negotiable. 10 minutes, Marla said. "I'll bring the kit that scares people and the kit that doesn't." She arrived in 7, headlights sweeping the frost-glossed pasture and throwing the cottonwoods into moving shadows. When she crossed the threshold, she brought with her the night's cold like a second coat and left it at the door with a practiced shrug. She crouched by Ranger without fuss, her braid falling forward like a dark question mark, and spoke to him with the affectionate professionalism of a teacher taking attendance. "Hello, Sheriff," she said to Ethan, then to the dog, "and hello to whatever you did with your day." She slipped a scanner from her bag, its small screen lighting her face as she drew it along the dog's shoulders. "Chip," she said, and the scanner chimed. "Registration to Clearwater County K-9 Unit, retired 3 months ago." Her eyes lifted to Ethan's. "Not yours." She palpated gently along the leg, rolled the pad of her thumb above the joint, and nodded once, the minimalist punctuation of certainty. "This isn't wire, isn't ice. Clean single edge. Knife, likely a box cutter your size call." She glanced at Lily and softened the clinical edges of her tone. "He's brave," she said. "He did the right thing coming here." Lily, for her part, watched Marla like a jury watches a witness, quiet, alert, weighing. "Are you a dog doctor?" Marla smiled with the corner of her mouth. "I'm the person who apologizes to animals right before I fix what people did to them." It earned her Lily's first real smile, brief as a candle in a draft. Marla drew up a tiny dose of pain medicine, explained in calm syllables that it was just kindness in a needle, and slid it subcutaneously, Ranger barely flinching. She cleaned the wound again, set a better wrap, and handed Ethan a list: no running, no stairs, warmth, recheck in the morning. Then, quieter, angled to Ethan's shoulder. "That cut was made on purpose." He interposed. "See the hair pattern?" He stepped between. "You find the story before the story finds her." She didn't eyeball the wall phone or the magnet or the rules. She didn't need to. She had known Ethan long enough to trust that his arguments with himself were the only ones that mattered. "You call me if the fever climbs," she said to Lily, leaving a small white card on the mantel with her cell written in the tidy hand of someone who'd filled out 1,000 rabies certificates and a few thank you notes she never sent. "But I don't have a phone," Lily said, not plaintively, simply as a fact. Marla turned to Ethan. "Then you call me." She stood, slipped her gloves on, and gave the living room the brief glance of a field medic, making sure her leaving wouldn't make a situation worse. At the door, she paused. "I have cocoa at my clinic, too," she said to Lily, as if this were the secret handshake of some benevolent order. The girl nodded solemnly, recognizing a fellow member. When the door closed behind Marla, the house was quiet again except for the wood stove's small appetite and the distant sibilance of wind moving through cottonwood branches. Ethan poured more cocoa, added a dot of whipped cream to Lily's as if he were signing his name to a promise, and set it in her hands. "Where's home?" he asked softly. Lily stared into the cup's steam like it might show her a map. "Mom will come back," she said. "She said to stay where the big tree leans, but the bad people are looking, so I can't say." Her voice dropped to a private register. "If I say it out loud, it makes it real." Ethan sat on the edge of the hearth, feeling the old ache in his knees that predicted weather changes better than the radio. He could see the night reaching in through the windows as if to tap him on the shoulder with its usual questions. Who are you responsible for, and when? Protocol hummed like a fluorescent bulb at the base of his skull. Call it in, move the pieces, protect the record. But the child and the dog made a geometry that didn't solve with paperwork. He thought of White Sunday, of how a father had given the one blanket to a kid, and how some acts reorganized the math of a life. He set his elbows on his knees and looked at Lily. "I can't promise you every kind of safety," he said. "That'd make me a liar. But I can promise this. I won't move you or Ranger anywhere tonight. We'll be warm. We'll think. In the morning, we'll go step by step. If your mom is coming, we'll be a place she can find." Lily's shoulders lowered, an inch only, but in a house like his, an inch could change the weather. Ranger sighed the way old dogs do when pain loosens its grip by a finger width, and tucked his nose against Lily's boot. The wind worried the eaves and found nothing to take. Ethan rose, checked the latch on the back door, nudged the stove, and stood for a moment at the window while the snow thickened into something that looked like forgiveness. The magnet with the CPS number held its corner on the wall, stolid and ready. He would call, soon, but not while the girl slept with a hand on the dog's ribs, counting breaths like prayers. Tonight was for being the warmest thing in the room. Tomorrow could argue the rest. Outside, Coldwater lay under its honest old coat, and inside a man, a child, and a working dog auditioned a fragile new trust by firelight. Morning came paler than resolve, a thin wash of light over Coldwater that turned every drift into a blank page daring you to write carefully. Ethan woke to the quiet cadence of a child's sleep and a dog's steady breath. Lily curled on the couch, one mittened hand resting like a paperweight on Ranger's shoulder. Ranger's eyes half-slitted in that watchful doze working dogs master when they want to guard and heal at the same time. While the kettle nudged toward a boil, Ethan used the kind of patience that makes horses decide to follow you and eased 2 fingers under the thick ruff at the base of Ranger's neck, parting fur millimeter by millimeter. The microchip scan last night had given them a name and a county. This morning he was hunting something unofficial. He found it. A thumbnail-sized tattoo tucked where a collar would hide it black ink. Old but sharp. 3 small triangles nested inside a ring with the number 17 pricked beneath. The triangles aligned like a mountain range. Ethan had seen that mark exactly once on a briefing slide in a windowless room. The Highline Narcotics Task Force had adopted it during last winter's rail yard takedown when meth shipments rode the steel spine of Montana like ghost freights. Not an official brand, more a private camp sign between handlers who'd shared bad coffee and worse weather. Ranger had worked a bigger game than county bites and bar fights. He rubbed the dog's chest with the back of his knuckles, the way good trainers do when praise needs to travel quiet. "You were seconded," he murmured, "and you saw things." Ranger's gaze held his for a breath, intelligent and unblinking. In it, Ethan read weariness and a wire of purpose that hadn't snapped. He snapped 2 photos of the tattoo with his phone, then stepped into the mudroom and dialed a number he'd kept less for convenience than for conscience. James Walker answered on the 3rd ring. Walker was late 30s, built thin as a fence rail and twice as tough, a man with a careful way of speaking that came from conquering a childhood stutter and turning deliberation into a kind of authority. He wore his hair clipped short because his life liked to snag on nothing. The only vanity he allowed was polished boots and case notes that read like surgical records. "Sheriff," Walker said, voice bright with a mind already moving, "you don't call early unless the weather or a man is wrong." Maybe both, Ethan said low. He described the tattoo, the chip, the cut that wasn't ice. He kept names out of it he couldn't properly protect yet. Walker exhaled like he'd found the corner of something. Try ring 17, he repeated. Highline's Taskers. They folded after the rail yard bust, but handlers keep the habit of old tribes. I'll pull the roster and see who carried a shepherd retired 3 months back. He paused, a sideways thought sharpening his tone. You hear chatter about Victor Kane? The name slid into the kitchen like a draft. From who? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer would be no one you could cite. No one I could drag into a courtroom, Walker said. But good liars start clearing brush before they run. Keep your lights on. Ethan made coffee, warmed milk for Coco, and listened to the house breathe. When Lily woke, she did it the way deer do, every muscle already informed of the world before the eyes opened. Her hair had dried into soft haystacks, and without the wind her face looked less carved and more simply ate. He handed her the cocoa with 2 hands so she'd feel the weight returning from him to her. We have to go by the station later, he said, truth in small doses. But first, one thing I'm not a cop for. Tell me something only you can tell. Lily's fingers tightened on the mug. Mom said to keep quiet, she whispered, the words huddling together. But keeping quiet didn't help last time. She glanced at Ranger, who lifted his head as if to second that motion. Her name's Hannah, Lily said, and once she said it, the name seemed to warm the air the way you open a door and let a friend in. Hannah Ridley. We were at the laundromat by the river. A man came. He smelled like metal and cologne. He had good boots. He said, "You owe me," and ledger, and evidence. Mom told him to leave. They argued. Ranger stood between us. The man laughed, but not like a joke. He had the kind of smile that looks like a cut. He said his name was Victor Kane. She drew the last 2 words slowly, as if the letters were sharp to the tongue. Lily's descriptions always made maps. Metal and cologne, good boots, smile like a cut. You could follow those to a door. Did he see you? Ethan asked. Lily shook her head, then nodded, then chose honesty over accuracy. He looked at me like I was furniture. But when we left, there was a black truck. It was there again yesterday on Main. Ranger's ears tipped forward at the name Kane, then stilled, the kind of trained response that said someone had spoken that syllable in work often until it taught nerves to listen. You did right, Ethan said, watching the dog and filing the reaction. We're going to go slow, and we're not going to be the loudest people in the room. He wrote the details on a yellow pad, the pencil pressing firm enough to bite wood. Victor Kane, metal cologne, boots, ledger, evidence, black truck. By late morning, Coldwater's City Hall wore its winter coat of salt stains and resolutions. Ethan climbed the limestone steps, the badge on his chest feeling heavier than its ounce count, and pushed through the double doors into the lobby where a Christmas cactus bloomed stubbornly against the cold. The municipal clerk, Mavis Holloway, looked up from a stack of license applications. Mavis was early 60s and neat as a hymn, hair set in a gentle gray helmet, lipstick a forgiving rose. She had the eyes of a schoolteacher who'd seen every variety of mischief and had decided to treat it all like a math problem solvable with patience and tea. Sheriff, she said with real warmth, the mayor asked me to send you straight in. The way she smoothed the papers into a square told Ethan everything she wasn't saying. Mayor Paul Redford's office felt designed to photograph well, built-in bookshelves full of biographies with uncracked spines, a framed print of a vintage WPA ski poster, windows clean to showroom clarity on a town that wasn't always pretty. Redford himself was mid-50s, trim the way money often is, with iron-gray hair parted as crisply as a legal brief and a tie the color of early wine. He had an accountant's shoulders and a salesman's smile, a combination that made donors feel safe and staff feel expendable. Years ago, he'd been the county's auditor when a wildfire budget overrun nearly cost him his career. He'd survived by learning to say efficiency as if it were grace. Ethan, he said, standing just far enough from the desk to look informal without risking intimacy. Sit. He didn't. Redford's smile thinned. I'm concerned, he went on, hand cutting a smooth arc in the air, about the optics around a vagrant minor and a dangerous animal in the sheriff's private residence. I'm hearing things. I'm hearing your department has resources tied up in a case that isn't a case. We have a process Child Protective Services intake placement. You know the drill. We can't, particularly in an election year, appear arbitrary. The word dangerous stuck in Ethan's craw, but he let it pass. The animal's a retired K9, he said. And the child is not a headline, she's a person. Redford spread his hands, magnanimous, like he was forgiving someone else's trespass. All the more reason to follow policy. Close out the vagrancy file, make the referral, be done. The last thing we need is a narrative. He paused, let the air cool. And Ethan, budgets will be tight. I need partners who understand that stability sometimes means not picking up every stone just to see what's under it. There it was, the velvet-wrapped knuckle. Ethan let the silence do its work long enough for Redford to hear it. My partner, he said finally, is the law. He turned to go. Mavis in the lobby performed the small kindness of not looking curious when he came out. Be careful, she murmured as she stamped a permit. They're counting votes rather than people this winter. Back at the house, snow began again, a hush typed across the town. Lily drew at the kitchen table Ranger in green crayon with legs too long and a smile you could trust. A laundromat with blue windows. 3 small triangles in the corner of the page she couldn't have known he'd found on Ranger's neck. He decided not to ask how children notice everything that loves them. He printed the tattoo photos, clipped them to his notes, and called Walker again. Voicemail. He texted the images with a single line. Confirm highline mark? He set motion lights on the porch and a trail camera at the top of the drive, country tricks born of nights when coyotes and men took the same routes. As dusk poured into the fields and made the cottonwoods into cut paper silhouettes, Marla phoned to check Ranger's pain level. She sounded like a metronome set to calm, the click of competence tamping down worry. Looks good? She asked. Staying on it, he said. Also, heads up, this may be bigger than a stray dog cut. It always is, she said softly, and hung up, leaving behind the comfort of someone who would show up when the phone rang ugly. After Lily brushed her teeth with the merciless concentration of a kid who needs perfect control of one small thing, she crawled back under the Afghan with Ranger, who arranged himself so that any noise would have to go through his ears before it touched her. Ethan sat in the dark living room, the stove's glass eye winking orange, and wrote what he knew on an index card he could put in his pocket without feeling like he was carrying a stone. Tattoo highline, 17. Chip Clearwater K9, retired. Cutbox cutter profile. Victim Hannah Ridley, mom. Aggressor Victor Kane, metal cologne, boots. Truck black, seen twice. Mayor pressure to close. At 10:11 p.m., the night changed temperature. Ranger lifted his head, not with the jerk of fear, but with the smooth certainty of a soldier hearing a familiar boot scuff outside a door. Ethan killed the lamps with a thumb, let his eyes widen to the dark, and stepped onto the porch, the cold laying a flat palm against his face. At the end of the drive, between the cottonwoods, cold light breathed from a pair of running lamps, too bright and too careful. A black pickup idled there, big-bodied brush guard on the front like clenched teeth, cab windows dark as confession, no courtesy plate light. Salt mist made a halo around the tires. Ethan didn't shout. He reached up and flicked the floodlight that washed the yard in white. The truck paused as if it had been asked a precise question, then rolled backward deliberately, the way a man leaves a room after he's counted the occupants. As it turned, the angle of the light caught the plate just enough for his mind to seize 3 characters, 6K3, before snow remade them into nothing. The taillights winked out and cold water swallowed the sound. Inside, Lily slept on, a mitten still resting on Ranger's neck. Ethan wrote 6K3 on the index card with a pencil so dull it almost didn't leave a mark, and understood that whatever story he'd stepped into had looked back, taken his measure, and chosen to return another night. By mid-afternoon, the snow had a chalky sheen that made every footprint look like a confession, and the rails singing faintly at the far edge of town gave the air a metallic thread. Ethan parked 2 blocks from the old freight spur where Coldwater once shipped hay and took delivery on its supplies of luck. The warehouses there sat with their backs to the wind and their faces to nothing, windows filmed in frost, doors chained with optimism. Marla slid out of her truck with that unhurried competence that puts skittish animals at ease. Tall willow frame in a quilted jacket the color of worn denim, braid tucked through a knit cap, a nick along her right knuckle from a calving chain gone wrong years back that had taught her to move gentle and commit. She carried a canvas vet bag and, because it was Marla, a thermos engraved with a dancing elk and the words, "Keep going." "You owe me that coffee," she said softly, but her eyes were already cataloging the place where drifts met walls, where a plow had cut and left ridges like ribs, the single set of fresh tire tracks turning in tight by a side door and then out again. Beside Ethan, Ranger set his weight evenly for the first time that day, pain managed into a dull compliance by Marla's shot and the dog's own iron habit of doing the job. He was 7 or 8 by tooth and eye, winter frosted at the muzzle, carrying himself like an old soldier who knows which noises matter. The wind lifted his saddle of black and tan, and he tasted it, ears pricked, a flicker of that working calm settling on him like a cloak. Ethan's hand fell lightly to the dog's ruff, not to hold him, but to speak the wordless, "We go quiet. We go together." They took the side path where the plow hadn't bothered, breaking crust with the muted squeak of sub-zero snow. The warehouse nearest the tracks had once been painted a cheerful grain sack red. Sun and winters had rubbed it down to a faded rust, like blood remembered. The service door's padlock had been opened recently. Ethan could tell by the fresh scuff and a bit of graphite shine at the shackle. He eased it with a gloved finger and it swung a fraction, not latched. He breathed, let his pulse climb down a rung, and moved inside with his flashlight low. Dust turned in their beams like a patient galaxy. The place smelled of rope, dry pallets, and the ghost suite of spilled malt. An office cube sat under a mezzanine cheap paneled walls, a desk of the brought-from-home species, a corkboard peppered with thumbtack wounds. On the desk were banker's boxes, 2 deep, lids askew the way a hurried hand leaves them when every minute doesn't belong to him. Marla stood by the door, guarding their backs with a stillness you only learn in barns and ERs. Ethan lifted the lid on the top box. Files, field forms, printouts, sunburned to beige, labels that had seen better glue. Highline, NTFF Yard Ops. He recognized the task force letterhead from that winter room he'd sat in, all steel folding chairs and men in coats who never took them off. Under a sheaf of seizure receipts lay a manila envelope marked Photos. He opened it. 4x6s slid into his palm rail cars, forklift lifts, pallets of fertilizer, then the faces, handlers grinning with their dogs and training muzzles, and there, against a chain-link fence on a night slick with snowmelt, a profile he knew now by the way Lily had shaped the name. Victor Kane, 30-something, maybe 40, the kind of face that looks weathered not by weather but by appetite. Close-cropped dark hair, jaw square but always a half-smile like a knife turned playfully in a hand, pale eyes that didn't blink much in flash. He stood half a step behind a taller man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. Mason Locke, the smuggler the feds had pinned 2 winters ago before half the charges collapsed under a paperwork avalanche. The caption on the back in ballpoint block letters, V. Kane, Locke Runner, Rail Yard Obes, 1214. In another photo, Victor's boots, good leather, oiled, were captured beside a pallet with the corner of a ledger peeking from plastic. The ledger word leaped at Ethan as if underlined by the cold. Lily's memory had been precise. He passed the photo to Marla, who looked and then looked again, a muscle in her jaw ticking as if measuring dosage. "That's him?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. The cut smile. Marla's eyes flicked toward the dog. "And this is the dog who stood between. Men like that," she said matter-of-fact, "teach you to love your work or quit it. No middle." He slid through Page's shipping schedules annotated in a fast, blunt hand, a smeared list of cash drops at highway motels, a copy of an unsigned affidavit from a confidential informant describing product hidden in hollowed combine gear shipped west, the kind of file that should live in a national evidence locker and instead slept in a cold county office until someone boxed it and walked it out to a warehouse that shouldn't have a key. The overhead lights were dead, but a ribbon of winter daylight snuck under the back door and lay across the concrete like a blade. Ranger's ears tipped toward it. His head followed an inch. Ethan held up a hand and stilled him. Quiet. Outside, a train coughed and moved on, the rails humming through bone, and with it came another sound, softer, like a boot scuff corrected mid-step. Ethan's neck prickled. He closed the box lid without letting it thump, slipped the photos into his coat, and nodded toward the office wall where a narrow gap opened to the mezzanine stairs. If they had company, the smartest direction was the one with angles and cover. Marla moved first, silent as a cat, scanning upward with her phone set to camera. No flash, just the pale digital eye widening the dark. Ranger came second, weight on 3 legs but arguing his body into a working gait, breath steady. Ethan followed, light low, gun holstered but unsnapped, the old calculus running through him with its cold clarity. Who is with me? Who is against me? What do we owe the next 5 minutes? At the first landing, voices arrived. 2, male. One pitched low with the pretense of calm, one higher and edged with meth's glassy impatience. "I said he'd come," the higher voice hissed. "He can't leave rocks unturned, the good sheriff." "We don't need him," the low voice answered, bored, calculating. "We need the boxes. He was supposed to call it in and be done. The mayor likes done." Ethan's mind filed mayor and moved on to now. He slid his eyes to Marla. She made the smallest tilt of her chin. 2, left. He leaned, giving just enough of his shoulder to see around the corner. At the mezzanine rail, a man stood with a crowbar loosened in his hand, the casual swagger of someone who's taught himself menace. Stringy, early 30s, face pinched by too much speed and too little sleep, red windburn scarring both cheeks, a cheap parka with a fur hood that made him look like a wolf who'd lost a bet. Beside him, more interesting, stood a broader man with a winter beard grown in to disguise a jaw a barber would call expensive. He kept his hands in a pair of leather gloves like he wanted not to leave prints or he didn't like what his fingers might do if they got to thinking. Not Victor Ethan would have known the cut smile anywhere, but a lieutenant wary enough to look over his shoulder twice. "Don't be fancy," gloved hands said. "We clock him, take the drives, burn the rest." Kane said 2 minutes. The crowbar man grinned, teeth small and multiple. "I can do a minute." In some other winter, Ethan might have called out, played the game where you turn bad men into brief philosophers, stall until backup makes sirens in the air. But Coldwater didn't have bodies to throw, not with budgets drafted like eulogies. He took the more honest path, move only as much as you need, and make the first seconds count. He stepped from the stairs' shadow and spoke in the same voice he used on spooked horses and belligerent drunks. "Bad idea," he said. "Worse execution." The head turned there. The tiny pause was the gap he lived for. He pushed Marla back with a knee, raised his light to blind the stringy one, and advanced, footwork clean. The crowbar came down in an ugly arc, fast and taught by 100 video games. Ethan had the angle right to take it high on his forearm, ride the blow, but in the instant before impact, the air filled with a new motion. Ranger, launching from 3 legs with the whir of a coiled spring released, a body built for impact, crossing the space like a thought becoming action. The shepherd hit crowbar at the wrist, not with teeth, but with the old-school shoulder check good canines learn when you want them to break a line and not a bone. The swing slewed wild, metal screaming off a steel stanchion where Ethan's skull had been a fraction of a second ago, sending a cascade of rust down like red snow. Gloved hands yanked for a pocket flash of box cutter blades silvering out of leather, and Ranger pivoted, back leg faltering, front doing the work of 2, stance making a door where there had been none. Ethan stepped into the opening and took gloved with a flat heel to the knee and a shoulder into the chest, keeping his gun holstered because introducing death into a room is like lighting dry tinder. You better mean to burn the whole barn if you spark it. The 3 men collided with the mezzanine rail in a tangle of breath and curses. The rail groaned. The ledger box on the desk below slid a few inches, coughing paper. Ethan felt the blow he hadn't seen. Crowbar had recovered enough to catch Ethan high on the back with the bar's hooked end, and there was the brief white pop of the old injury near his shoulder blades singing its old song. He went to a knee and came up again out of pure habit and a promise he'd made to himself a long time ago in white weather. Marla, steady as a metronome, had picked up a length of rebar from the wall, and her voice cut through the grunts with the steadiest sound in the room. Enough. Not loud, simply decisive. The kind of tone that has stopped a panicked 1,200-pound mare and a panicked man with equal success. It bought a heartbeat, and you can do a year's work in the right heartbeat. Ranger took that gift and shouldered gloved again, hard, driving him into the wall, box cutter skittering off into the dark like a bad idea choosing to leave. Crowbar stumbled, swung, overcommitted, and ate plywood, the tool clanging into shadow. Ethan planted him with a forearm across the collarbone and found his wrist in a grip that belonged to his grandfather, the wrestler, not to the law. "Now we're all done," he said, breath even, eyes on the second man who was already backing toward a service ladder like a raccoon reconsidering the trash bin. "Tell Kane he miscounted." Gloved hands smiled thinly a cut, a cousin to the one Lily had described, and vaulted the rail with a cat's grace he hadn't previewed, dropping to the concrete below with a thud and a grunt, scooping something as he ran that Ethan's stomach recognized a split second too late. A thumb drive from the desk, taped under a drawer lip where only someone who'd put it there would look. He hit the back door and was gone, cold racing in like a rumor. The silence that followed had grit in it. Ethan kept Crowbar pinned one more breath, then cuffed him with the cold metal song of restraint. Marla slid a palm along Ranger's ribs, reading pain the way some read Braille, and the dog let out a low huff as if to apologize for still being mortal. Blood from the old wound had spotted through the wrap, fresh but not pouring. "He saved you," she said, not as praise, but as a diagnosis. Ethan looked at the crease in the stanchion where the bar had hit, and imagined the geometry without a shepherd in it. "Yeah," he said. He did. He took 2 seconds, just 2, allowed himself the private luxury of a hand along Ranger's neck, fingers catching in the thick fur under the collar where the tattoo slept like a secret, and then he stood and listened. Far off, a horn, a truck, the rails humming indifferent. Closer, the warehouse breathing. The ledger boxes waited like patient witnesses. Somewhere beyond doors and budgets, a name moved through the cold with a cut of a smile. They would not chase tonight. They had the files, a man in cuffs, and a dog who had already given more than the world should ask. That was enough to carry out into the bluing afternoon without writing the story faster than it wanted to be read. Evening laid a blue hush over Coldwater, a color that made window panes look like held breath and turned the cottonwoods into cutouts against a deepening sky. Ethan eased the front door shut with the quiet of a man who'd just walked out of a room that wanted to keep him, set the ledger files on the mantel, and watched sparks ladder in the stove until the room remembered how to be warm. Ranger limped 2 careful steps, shook once to settle the pain, then crossed to Lily as if drawn by a signed oath. The shepherd 7 or 8 by tooth, black and tan saddle wintered with gray, left ear nicked into a crescent rested his broad head on the child's knee. Lily Harper, 8, hair the color of dry wheat now clean and flyaway around her face, sat cross-legged on the rug with boots aligned like soldiers by the hearth, small hands steady the way hands get when they have learned that shaking makes adults speak in worried voices. Her blue eyes searched Ethan's face as if he were a map, and she was trying to find a road that didn't end in a fence. Marla arrived a few minutes behind him, bringing in a slash of night air and setting her canvas vet bag by the couch with a deliberate gentleness that made skittish animals uncoil. Dr. Marla Jennings, early 40s, tall and willowy, long dark hair caught in a practical low braid streaked with 2 silver threads. Handsome face made kind by competence. Washed her hands at the kitchen sink, the motion so practiced it could have been prayer. She checked Ranger's bandage without fuss, palms square and warm, eyes clinical but soft at the edges. "Stable," she said to Ethan. "Sore, but stable. He'll want to be a hero again before he should. You'll have to be boring for both of you." Her mouth tugged at a smile that didn't quite arrive. Her knuckles bore a faint nick from some calving chain long ago, the white seam of an old lesson: move gentle, commit fully. Ethan poured cocoa milk, powder, the kindness of cinnamon, and set a mug into Lily's hands. He sat on the hearth, elbows on knees, posture relaxed except for the line in his shoulders that never truly left. "Lily," he said, voice quiet enough that it belonged to the room and not the badge. "I need you to tell me something only you can tell. Not because I like asking, because it's the way to get from now to better." She held the mug close, let steam touch her cheeks, and stared into it as if it held constellations. When she looked up, she seemed smaller and older at once. "My mom, Hannah," she said, speaking the name like opening a door. "Hannah Ridley. She told me we were helping. She said people put bad things on trains, and she told a nice man in a brown suit about it, and then other men got mad. We moved to the motel by the river with the broken soda machine. She said we were safer near other people." Her breath hitched, but she kept going, words built of small courage stacked carefully. "At the laundromat he came, the man with the metal smell and the cut smile. Her hand traveled instinctively to Ranger's ruff. He said ledger and evidence and owe me. Mom told me to stay behind the dryers. When she said run, we ran. Ranger didn't leave me. She swallowed what wanted to be a sob and made it into a breath. They put Mom in a car. I tried to open the door, but Ranger pushed me back and we hid. I waited at the big leaning tree like she told me. Then the snow came. The room held still. The stove popped like a tiny punctuation mark. Ethan let the silence lay there long enough to be honest, then set his cup down and moved to the coat rack where Lily's puffer hung. He'd noticed last night that one collar seam bulged as if it had a secret. Marla, who read fabric and fur with equal fluency, lifted the jacket, ran a finger along the stitching, and made a small sound a person makes when a suspicion says hello. "There's something in here," she said, calm as surgery. She took out a pocket kit, a travel mending set that looked like it had stitched more hearts than Hems unpicked 4 careful red stitches and teased free a twist of waxed paper no bigger than a postage stamp. Inside lay a strip of card with a number written in a tight, no-nonsense hand, and 2 initials, R.H. There was also a note, 6 words printed as if by someone who didn't want handwriting to be a signature. If lost, call. Trust this man. Ethan felt his pulse notch up, not from fear, but from the rare sensation of a world giving you exactly the thing you needed when you asked politely. "R.H.," he said. "Ranger Hale?" Marla ventured, half teasing at her own expense. "Ronan Hale," Ethan answered, memory catching. He'd heard the name in a briefing the winter the Highline Task Force was still breathing. Special Agent Ronan Hale, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Northwest Field, Narcotics and Logistics. Hale had a reputation for showing up before meetings started and leaving after chairs were stacked, a man whose ego took coffee in the hallway while he worked. He also had a reputation for a partner who died on an undercover buy in Spokane 12 years back, a ghost that made his voice polite even when he should have been sharp. Ethan dialed the number. It rang twice and caught on a voice that sounded like granite politely offering you a place to sit. "Hale." "Sheriff Ethan Cole, Coldwater, Montana," Ethan said. "I've got a child, 8, named Lily Harper, mother Hannah Ridley. You and she were recently acquainted. I have reason to believe your case and my life have become the same road." A pause. You could hear a mind organizing facts on the other end, building shelves before putting anything away. "Sheriff," Hale said, and Ethan could see him without having seen him. Early 50s, runner's build gone a little gaunt by miles. Salt and pepper hair cut short because the day doesn't have time for vanity. Face long, eyes gray with a habit of looking past you to what's coming next. Suit that works like a uniform rather than a costume. The voice carried a west of the mountains baritone, cordial without warmth. "Tell me everything you can in 2 minutes. Don't spend adjectives. Spend nouns." Ethan did, counting it out without decoration. Lily, Hannah, laundromat, Victor Kane, box cutter, retired K9 with highline tattoo, ledger photos, warehouse, 1 suspect in custody, 1 suspect fled with a drive. He left the mayor's name out of it because you don't throw matches at dry grass unless you want to see something burn. Hale's breath landed in a soft exhale that sounded like a thank you for someone remembering how to report. "Your mother," he said, pivoting to Lily with the slight change in tone adults make when they want a child to know they see her, "is alive." Lily's head came up so fast her hair lifted. Ranger, who read hearts the way some dogs read wind, pressed closer. "But," Hale continued, scrupulous with hope, "she is not free. We lost contact with her safe intermediary 3 nights ago. We tracked a device to a development outside Missoula Silver Creek Estates. On paper, it's a rental owned by a holding company that owns nothing else. In truth, it's a way station for men who move product on rails and need quiet houses where no one asks why a garage light stays on until 3 a.m. His voice didn't harden when he said men. It cooled. "We're down bodies," he added, factual, no self-pity. Task force shuttered, seasonal shifts, budget theater. You know the play. Someone local has been talking out of school. I suspect a deputy somewhere wants a promotion more than a pension. Ethan felt that land with the dull accuracy of a hammer on a post. Deputy Frank Howard's recent neat haircuts and new boots. Frank's fondness for cash-only diners. Frank's sudden habit of closing doors before he took phone calls. Frank, late 30s, compact, big forearms from high school wrestling and a jaw that worked when he lied. had lately cultivated a swagger that didn't belong to a man whose mortgage was a math problem. Ethan tucked the thought away, a nail saved for when you had the right board. "Can you move on the house?" he asked Hale, keeping his voice from sprinting ahead of the facts. "I can move on a house when I can write a warrant a judge will sign," Hale said, dry as a Montana winter. "Right now I have smoke and no fire my office will allow me to acknowledge. I need a witness or a corroborated signal. Your files might be the match if they're clean." He paused. "And Sheriff, whoever has Hannah knows she is insurance. They will not advertise. They will not be patient if they smell heat." Lily had moved to the edge of her seat, the cocoa forgotten. "She's okay?" she asked, small but steady. Hale chose his next words like a man placing feet on a narrow trail. "She is alive," he said, repeating the only thing he could swear to. "And she will stay that way better if we move like hunters, not like drums." Marla, who had been quiet, stepped into the silence with the competence of a person who refuses to be an audience when a scene needs a hand. "You'll have a clean copy of every page we pulled," she told Hale, already reaching for Ethan's stack. "And a vet's note on the injury pattern box cutter, not ice. If that gets you a warrant, write faster." Hale made a sound that might have been a laugh in a kinder decade. "Text me your email," he said. "I'm sending an encrypted drop. Sheriff Cole, keep your porch light on and your curiosity dialed to prudent. I'll be 3 hours out if I can peel a car." Ethan ended the call and stared at the wall a moment, measuring the shape of the room now that the furniture had new names. Outside, the wind nosed the eaves. Inside, Lily's face had changed, a flash of something like sun through cloud brief, real then the weather of waiting again. "She's alive," Lily said, and the words seemed to warm her cheeks more than the stove. "Alive," Ethan confirmed. He could have said everything else. Cautions, contingencies, the long dictionary of law, but he did not. He rose and crossed to the hall where the landline hung, the Child Protective Services magnet holding its corner like a rebuke and a reminder, and he stood there for 3 breaths, the way he did before opening a barn door when he wasn't sure what waited on the other side. He picked up the phone, dialed Walker. The detective answered with that measured calm of a man who files panic under P and never loses the folder. Ethan gave him what he could: the warehouse, the photos, the plate fragment 6K3, the likely house at Silver Creek. He left out Hale's name and Frank's shadow. "You don't accuse where you can prevent." "I'll run the plate," Walker said, "and I'll keep this on the quiet channel. My quiet, not the department's." He hesitated. "You ever feel like you're sweeping a floor while someone else is drilling holes in the ceiling?" "Every winter," Ethan said, and hung up. He found Lily a pencil and an index card. "Write your mom a note," he said. "Not with the address, just something true." Lily pressed her mouth into a straight line of courage and wrote 4 words in careful block letters. "I stayed. With Ranger." She tucked the card into her pocket like a talisman. Ranger, reading a room's temperature the way a barometer reads air, adjusted himself so his body made a wall on the side where fear typically came from. Ethan set the porch light on and the kettle to low. He checked his sidearm, then checked the lock on the back door because decency and caution aren't opposites, they're twins. Through the window he could see city plow snow turned sepia by sodium lamps and the long, pale field that made his house look small and stubborn in the best way. Somewhere outside Missoula, a house the color of new money held a woman who knew where the ledgers were buried. Somewhere in town, a deputy had started rehearsing the story he'd tell when someone asked where he was last night. Ethan returned to the hearth and sat with Lily and the dog, the 3 of them a small republic under the jurisdiction of firelight. "Tomorrow," he said, because sometimes tomorrow is the closest thing to a plan you can give a person without lying. Lily nodded, eyelids finally lowering, her hand finding Ranger's ribs and counting the rhythm that said, "Here we are, here we are, here we are." The blizzard came in sideways off the bitter roots, a white script written fast across the dark, and the 2-lane towards Silver Creek Estates vanished and reappeared like a skittish animal. Ethan drove with his jaw set and his hands easy on the wheel. Ranger braced in the back like a ship's figurehead, 7 or 8 years old. Black and tan coat salted with gray, left ear nicked, leg wrapped in blue vet tape that looked too small to be holding that much courage in place. Special Agent Ronan Hale rode shotgun, lean and long-limbed in a field parka that had seen federal winters, salt and pepper hair cut short, gray eyes that watched and measured and never dramatized. Hale's voice had granite in it and a mercy that didn't waste itself. Emergency authorization had come through an assistant U.S. attorney with a low tolerance for insurance hostages, exigency stamped across the warrant like a bell. A third figure tailed them in a government Tahoe, Agent Kira Sloan, early 30s, freckled and narrow-hipped, copper hair braided tight to the collar, gloves cut off at the fingertips for better trigger discipline. Her face wore the focused, unshowy kindness of a paramedic who's also learned to run toward noise. Back in Coldwater, Dr. Marla Jennings had settled Lily on Ethan's couch with Ranger's empty collar in her hands and cocoa steaming in a mug. Marla did not promise sleep, only that she would be the warmest thing in the room until Ethan returned. The subdivision crouched under the storm, a ring of new money houses with too many garage bays and no history in their bones. Hale killed the headlights 2 blocks out, and they coasted to a stop in a shadow where a row of junipers broke the wind into small negotiations. "No heroics," he said, and said it to himself as much as to Ethan. "Garage is your best window. Contractors leave the side door screws underdriven." He handed over a tiny fiber optic snake camera the size of a wish. Ethan's body relaxed a notch in the presence of a plan. He thought better when the corners of a thing were clear. The camera slipped under the weather strip and framed a garage larger than most barns, lit by the severe honesty of fluorescent. On a folding chair, a woman in her mid-30s, wrists tied with zip ties, face turned away from the cold concrete but toward the door, as if she had refused to give up her habits as a mother, and had spent her captivity learning the house's breathing. Hannah Ridley had a worn beauty that hadn't gotten the memo about fear, a fine-boned face, dark hair haphazard from days of poor sleep, blue eyes scaled down to watchfulness, a paper cut on her lip blooming red in the white light. A service door opened onto a mudroom. Voices drifted through, 2 men trading impatience for nerve. Upstairs somewhere a third voice moved in and out, smooth, amused, a note of iron under velvet. Victor Kane enjoyed the weather inside a room he controlled. "We go clean," Hale said. "Sloan, you anchor the rear and float to the stairs. Cole, you take the garage no shots if restraint will do. There's a kid on the far end of this story." "Copy," Kira said, her Montana vowels clipped to federal speed. The wind shoved a handful of snow under Ethan's collar like a dare. He breathed, counted the rooms he hadn't seen, touched Ranger's rough once and old packed, and eased the side door. Contractor screws had indeed been lazy. 3 turns, and the latch gave with the softest of resignations. The service door to the mudroom creaked against its will. Voices stopped. Silence acquired edges. "Don't," a new voice said. Tight, and Ranger's head tilted, reading where the danger sat in the house the way he'd been trained to read a rail yard's bad corners. The first man came through hard, a compact shape in a work coat with a jaw that told on itself. Deputy Frank Howard, late 30s, compact wrestler's build now inflated by a month of arrogance, blue eyes too bright, breath sour with energy drinks and alibis. His badge was off, his duty pistol wasn't. He stopped like he had run into a mirror and seen what he'd become. "Frank," Ethan said, and put the whole of their shared years into the name-training days, night shifts, the dumb jokes you tell to keep from thinking about the one wreck you arrived too late to mend. "It isn't too late to be on the right side of the door." For a heartbeat, Frank looked like a boy about to throw the rock down. Then the old swagger reoccupied his bones. "It's already decided," he said, a lie rehearsed until it sounded like a prayer. "Budget's done. Mayor wants quiet. You should have closed your file." Behind him, the second man gloves, winter beard, the lieutenant from the warehouse moved for something in his pocket. "Don't," Hale said from 2 feet of air behind his shoulder, voice low enough to be a law all by itself. Gloved hands froze. Upstairs, that cut smile shifted. "Sheriff Cole," Victor called pleasantly. "You brought the weather in with you. That's rude." Ethan let the voice pass through him like a blade through water and stepped into the garage. Hannah turned her head at the sound of feet she'd somehow decided belonged to help. Up close, she was all the things Lily's voice had promised. Small in the way tough women are small. Knuckles bruised from testing zip ties against the logic of kitchen drawers. Eyes the same exact blue as the child's. "Lily," she said on a breath that ran hot with relief and warning at once. "Is she—" "Warm," Ethan said, cutting her free with a knife that had only ever been used to free. And those eyes closed 1 second as if to thank God, and then opened because God likes people who keep paying attention. "You're the man with the dog," she said, seeing Ranger as if he were a known letter in an unknown word. Ranger checked the corners, chest a low engine, body a door that could be closed against whatever rushed next. The lieutenant lunged impatient, and Hale took him like a math problem levers, fulcrums, a punch that wasn't showy, and landed exactly where it needed to land. Frank looked left, looked right, and decided to flee upward, choosing the kind of mistake winter towns teach, running from a thing into the place it lives. He hit the stairs, and Ranger's ears flattened an instant before Ethan heard the box cutter's whisper metal opening like a cheap joke. Victor came down slow, as if descending a stage, black wool over a sweater, boots good enough to sell in a catalog, eyes pale and busy. The cut smile flickered when it saw Ranger. "So," he said, "they kept the relic." The blade tilted, a casual threat designed to make the room's heart rate match his. Victor moved toward Hannah because men like him always move toward the thing someone else loves. Ethan stepped, but snow and blood and law make a man's legs honest about time. Ranger made the decision for him. The shepherd launched, the foreleg with the blue tape barely touching concrete, all his weight and history turned into a single clean line that intersected Victor's center of gravity with a thud that took the agent's breath and the criminal's balance. Victor's wrist snapped outward, the box cutter skittering across the floor like a bad idea deciding to leave. He went down hard, a chair clattering, and Ethan was on him with the kind of grip that ends arguments. "It's over," Ethan said, and meant the smaller battle, not the long war. Frank stumbled back down the stairs with the panic of a man who has run out of story and tried to write a new ending on the landing. Hale met him halfway and finished the chapter with handcuffs, and a Miranda whispered like a liturgy for men who had wanted power more than a pension. Kira Sloan ghosted through the hall, cleared rooms with the economy of a dancer, found no other bodies, no other weapons, nothing but a house staged for a disappearance. Sirens approached low and disciplined. Walker's cruiser slid into the drive, his thin face composed into that steady attention he'd earned, not been given. He took Frank without commentary, eyes holding a disappointment so quiet it hurt more than shouting. "We caught your plate," he said to no one and everyone. 6K3+3 we'll get from the HOA cameras. Hannah stood because she'd decided sitting was for later, not because her legs were ready, and Ranger pressed a hip to her shin as if to issue a temporary loan of balance. "My daughter," she said, and everything important in the room organized itself around that noun. "She's safe," Ethan repeated, and this time safe meant now, not always, and it was enough to move the world another inch toward spring. They didn't linger. This was the part of the work where staying to admire your accuracy gets you killed. They walked Hannah through the snow to the Tahoe, Kira wrapping her in a foil blanket that made a shy music, Hale scanning the street the way you do when you've had to tell a mother in Spokane that a partner won't be coming home. In Coldwater, Marla opened Ethan's door the moment his headlights pulled in, Lily behind her with Ranger's empty collar clamped in both hands like a talisman. The reunion didn't explode. It landed, soft and overwhelming, like the first heavy snow on fence posts. Hannah dropping to her knees even though the floor was hard, Lily's arms a fierce circle around her, Ranger fitting his big head into the small space between them and making of it a pack. Ethan looked away because there are some things a man should let be private even when they happen in his living room. When morning came, the town read its own headlines in coffee shops and at kitchen sinks. Victor Kane in county lockup awaiting transport on federal charges, aggravated kidnapping, obstruction, conspiracy tied to rail logistics. Deputy Frank Howard suspended and then let out under internal affairs and Walker's too calm gaze. Files from an old task force cataloged and boxed into evidence under chain of custody as neat as Walker's boots. Mayor Paul Redford, face a shade paler and tie carefully humble, stood on the courthouse steps and spoke the word heroism like it cost him something. He praised interagency cooperation, thanked our vigilant sheriff, and in the same breath announced a pause on consolidation of law enforcement services pending further fiscal review. The town understood the translation. The station would stay. Ethan took no stage. He stood at the back of the crowd where sunlight bounced off plowbanks and made squinting men look like prophets. An adoption form sat folded in his pocket. Ranger, retired K9, to be placed permanently with Sheriff Ethan Cole. Owner's signature, Clearwater County, vet of record, Dr. Marla Jennings. When the clerk slid the new tag across the counter later, it chimed against the metal like someone had rung a very small bell for the right reason. He threaded it onto a fresh leather collar at the kitchen table with the ceremony a man gives a quiet sacrament, and Ranger submitted with the dignity of a soldier receiving a new rank that was really an old oath with a different name. By early spring, the wind changed key and the fields came up in damp browns, promising greens. On a Saturday with sunlight like forgiveness, Lily played in Ethan's yard, a cheap kite stitched from a grocery sack pulling against its string with the stubborn optimism of all things that want air. Ranger paced beneath it, amber eyes amused, body sound again, blue tape gone, the scar on his leg, the kind of line a life keeps for reference. Hannah sat on the porch step with a cup between her palms, tired and starting to be less so, hair caught back, face given back to itself. Marla stopped by with a bag of dog biscuits and the kind of smile you allow when storms have receded beyond earshot. Ethan leaned the porch post with coffee that tasted better than it had in a year and let himself feel what he usually deferred, that sometimes the uniform isn't armor so much as a promise you make and keep, one small warm act at a time until winter decides to break. Here is the quiet lesson this story leaves behind. You do not need a badge or a courtroom to change a life. Most days, it is enough to notice the person shivering at the edge of your attention, to keep the porch light on, to be the warmest thing in the room. Courage is rarely loud. It is the steady choice to show up, to keep a promise, to stand between harm and someone smaller than the storm. Kindness does not cancel fear, but it gives fear less room to breathe. In everyday life, that looks simple. Check on a neighbor, call the friend who went quiet, carry a cup of comfort to someone waiting in a long winter of their own. Support your local shelters and first responders, and when you cannot fix everything, stand and keep watch. Presence is a kind of rescue. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs a little thaw today. Comment with a moment when kindness found you, and subscribe for more true heart stories of love, growth, and redemption. If you are praying for children, families, and the working dogs who protect them, write amen in the comments. May God bless you and the ones you love and keep your homes warm with courage and grace.